On Christmas Day, I did two things. I got caught up on the Gleeman and the Geek Patreon podcast, ending my baseball hiatus since the World Series concluded, and I began shaving out Rink 1. Rink 1 has not had visible lines since before I started this job. The leading theory is there was contamination in the water used when initially flooding the ice sheet, which caused all the white paint to float and obscure the lines, also causing large areas of gray in the ice where the white paint completely shifted away or floated up and got shaved out. Y'all have not seen Rink 1 on this channel before, and the reason for that is because even after laboring away at it for 2 hours on camera, I still wouldn't feel good about showing you the end product. So we closed the rink between Christmas and New Year, and we shaved it down to sand, painted it, installed vinyl lines, and built it back up. I apologize, but I'm not comfortable doing any filming during operating hours. It feels inappropriate for me to do that. So this episode is going to be me primarily reading a script and using photos and videos that I do have to aid that. The first step is to shave out all the ice until we are just left with a tiny layer of ice on top of our sand base. To do this, there is no rhyme or reason. You just shave away ice with the edger and the Zamboni. This is perhaps the most time-consuming part of the whole process, either that or flooding it to build the ice back up. You're limited by how much ice can fit in a bucket when you're shaving, how much battery a Zamboni has, how many tanks of ice can be removed before the blade is too dull to be effective at shaving the ice up, and how many machines can be put onto the ice at a time without risking a mistake in the chaos, which is inherently limited by how many operators are available to use the Zambonis. On Christmas Day, I was in alone. I raised my ice temps up to like 20 degrees so it would be softer to cut through. Even then, I faced bottlenecks. The first Zamboni that I used for shaving, Phyllis, needed to be plugged in to charge after just 5 buckets of ice removed. I also had to do 3 blade changes, which took me probably 45 minutes each. This is because I used all 3 of our machines for shaving, and 2 of those 3 machines had blades on day 6 of use. The general rule being that a blade should be changed every week. I did the majority of my ice shaving with the most fresh bladed machine and drove all 3 machines until they needed their blades changed. Cut out scrolling, Murray. Because it was the first day of the ice out process, I was able to follow a general pattern that I felt allowed me to very efficiently remove ice. More importantly, it allowed me to repeatedly drive 3 different dry shaving patterns that I needed to practice. The first one is called a 3-2-1 dry shave. It is incredibly simple. I didn't really need to practice it, but it was beneficial to commit it to my memory as a potential replacement for my classic perimeter pull. My new boss maintains the ice at my sister facility, which is also the NHL's Avalanche's practice facility. So he knows so much more than me, and I am now learning new things at a dizzying rate. While I've always done a perimeter pull to level the ice between the boards and the rest of my ice sheet after edging, my new boss does a 3-2-1, so I have made the switch. I don't know if I prefer it, but I am going to give it a go and draw my own conclusions. The first lap of a 3-2-1 dry shave is against the boards with your blade lifted 2 turns from its original set point, then another lap around the boards and you lower it 1 turn, and then a final lap around the boards with it all the way, or 2 turns down, which is all the way back at that starting set point. Then you offset half of a conditioner length, so about 6 feet, and drive 2 laps around at that distance, and 1 lap around the boards at 1 full conditioner length away. I do like the idea of doing 3 laps around the boards and slowly tapering the ice level down. By gradually lowering my blade to the proper set point, it feels gentle, mindful, and generally satisfying from atop my steel steed. Next, I took off a box of ice from each crease using my corner pull dry shave pattern. I have been driving this pattern a ton, and I now have a pretty standard pattern that I am driving. I'll explain that more in depth in a future video when I finally get a good camera shot. The general idea is that I am starting by shaving out ice as deep as I can get into each corner, and with each pass I am shifting closer towards center ice, shifting away from that corner. You will not see me raise my blade at all during this because the only goal I had currently was to just shave out ice, but in future videos you will see me addressing the higher spots and the lower spots by lifting my blade so that I'm not shaving spots that are at a good point, helping level that ice sheet overall. The final dry shave pattern I was practicing was a roaming figure 8. On Christmas Day, I was able to practice this pattern enough that I comfortably established that Zam 3 turns right much tighter than it turns left. I have been learning how to adjust my roaming figure 8 accordingly, but the reason this is an issue now, but not with the full sheet figure 8 I have been doing, don't mind Murray scrolling down in the script, which I've done on multiple occasions for you, is because my turns are forced to be a lot tighter to fit the figure 8 pattern into a much shorter width versus the full length of the ice when I do my full sheet figure 8. You might even see me back up and lift my conditioner then back up to avoid hitting the boards on these roaming figure 8s I'm doing. I have since learned my radius, but at the time I was really struggling with those left turns that I was forced to take super wide. Towards the end of the day, the GM of my rink came in and showed me how he uses the edger to aid in ice removal. He took the edger, dropped the blade down several turns, or dropped it and then turned it down several turns once the blade was dropped, and just drove it across the ice sheet several times. It felt like it should be illegal, but it was kind of liberating. It was a nice reminder that the only goal right now is to shave, shave, shave. We continued to shave out the ice for the next couple of days. As we reached sand base in some areas, we would mark it with cones and avoid it while continuing to shave out the other regions. It was very interesting to see how he ended up finagling the Zambonis into the strangest orientations to do targeted shaving. We ended up reversing the machines all the way up to the boards in some spots in the corners, then slowly driving forward and lowering the conditioner to shave out like a 15-foot stretch of ice, then backing it up and repeating it at a slightly different angle to cut against the grain ad nauseum. Once we reached the point where our vinyl lines were very close to the surface, we chipped out a portion of ice to expose it. Then we grabbed it and just ripped it out, and it would send these chunks of ice flying because there was probably still a 1/4 inch of ice on top of some parts of that line. I really wish I had a video because it was the most satisfying part of the entire process. I loved it. I really felt like a barbarian. It's always kind of nice when the objective is to do damage, right? That was the whole idea behind Cartoon Network original Destroy, Build, Destroy, hosted by Andrew W.K. Whoever that is. That totally just unlocked a childhood memory. We pulled the vinyl because if we shaved it with the Zam, it could get stuck in the augers and do damage. Once all the ice was shaved out, my boss took me out to examine the sheet. Seeing the footprint before ice is installed can help inform how you need to maintain your ice sheet once the ice is in. As a general rule with my board system, Becker brand boards, your ice is at a good point if it is at the lower bolts of your kick plate. I have discussed this in more detail on prior videos. This rings much more true on a rink with a concrete base, because it tends to be much more consistently level across the whole sheet. Sand is much more prone to heaving and tends to be a much less level surface to build ice on. So identifying the highest points in the sand is crucial to maintaining the ice sheet long term. On Rink 1, the player door closest to the lobby appeared to be the highest point in the sand. The adjacent short straightaway behind the crease had a cooling pipe concerningly close to the surface that we could see once we edged away the ice. This means no sand barrier and one less layer of protection for this cooling pipe. The most superficial conclusion to draw is that we should not have the bottom bolts visible throughout this corner because the risk of shaving up paint or hitting one of the cooling circuit pipes is not worth any reward. There is theoretically ideal and operationally correct. With a sand footprint, you work much more in the realm of operationally correct. What I mean is that the implication of these high spots is that we will need to adjust the ice depth of the entire sheet to accommodate them. The least dramatic way to do this would be to maintain the lowest comfortable amount of ice in these spots that are high, and level the rest of the ice sheet to it. This may mean keeping 0.75 inches of ice across this region, but if it's 0.75 inches higher than the low spots in the sand, then the rest of the sheet would need to be maintained at 1.5 inches to support that 0.75 sustainably. Or if we kept this spot at 1.5 inches, we would need 2.25 inches of ice across the rest of the sheet in this scenario. This would be a huge burden on the compressor system to keep all of that ice cold, and we would struggle to keep firm ice for user groups. Now we are starting to build. The compressor was set to keep the sand at 14 degrees, making water freeze efficiently. Next, I did something called a leveling flood. I went out with a fireman's hose and just laid water across the whole ice sheet for about 40 minutes. This helped to fill in low spots before we began to layer our white paint base. Our white paint base consisted of 3 layers of misted white paint applied in alternating patterns. It is crucial that the ice sheet is no more than 16 degrees on the surface when applying the white paint. The paint itself is flaky at a microscopic level, and for it to properly sit flat and make a blanket of white paint, you need to have it at 16 degrees. This is the setup we used for misting white paint. A 100-gallon tank, a motor to pump it through the hose, and a series of sprayers attached to a boom. We filled the tank with 100 gallons of cold water, added 3 boxes of white paint powder, and mixed it with a large whisk attached to a drill to mix it all together. Once the third coat of about 90 gallons of white paint was completed, we thoroughly rinsed out the paint tank, hose, and boom. When clean, we applied several light coats of cold water to seal in the paint layer. Now it is time to put in our lines. I do not want to get too in the weeds with the process, but we used twine to make sure all of our lines and face-off dots and creases were perfectly aligned. I would say everything is dimensionally precise within a 1/4 inch based on how we did it. For all of the circles on the ice sheet, we had lengths of wire that were the same length of the radius of each circle. One end of the wire would be held in place in the center, while a marker was used to draw a circle around that point. Okay, Murray, now it's time to engineer a whack camera stand so you can film yourself explaining how you did the vinyl circles. Hello there! Oh god, I gotta get down so low to be in the camera shot. Yes, I could just move the camera so I don't need to do this, but I'm already so committed. So here is going to be a representation of the marker circle that we made using the length of wire to get the proper radius. So this is just a marker line, and then what we did for the circles, it's just one extra step from the lines. The lines, you get them put down, and then you use, I'm out of frame again. This is such a hassle. With the normal lines, you would get them down, you would use a backpack sprayer with cold water and you would spray it. The water immediately freezes on the cold ice and tacks it in place. It kind of acts like glue. So, my hands don't really get cold, so I was doing the holding of the vinyl for the circles. My SpongeBob Van's yellow shoelace will represent the red vinyl that I was installing. So, if we're starting right here, then I had the end of it, and I put it right here, and I held it nice and tight, and it got sprayed all the way along this strip with cold water, and then I would move over, do another couple of inches, and the idea is you just do it so in such small increments that you can't see that the straight vinyl is being turned into a circle. But going all the way around, keeping your fingers on the ice, it's not a particularly desirable job, and I found it to be my Rink installation superpower. Call that job security or something. Here's what the ice looked like with everything except the hash marks installed. I have worked 17 of the last 18 days. Hash marks install day was that one day off. But I'll leave you with these images because they are the closest thing I have to the untouched finished product. Once the hashes were in, we flooded the ice with the boom until it was just over 3/4 of an inch. At 3/4 of an inch, you have enough ice built up that you don't need to worry about the weight of a Zamboni cracking the ice. While the hose and boom takes a minimum of 3 people to overcome the encumbrance of and effectively flood, a Zamboni only takes 1 person. We quickly built up the ice level, and once we were able to get a Zam out there, we exclusively used Zam 2 because the sprayers mimicked the boom that we were using. And on the morning of January 2nd, I edged the sheet, resurfaced it, and the first users took the ice at 7:35 a.m.